So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about Vedic chronology and how it happens to militate against the Aryan immigration theory. The conventional view is that this start of the Vedas was in about 1500 BC, practically immediately after the supposed Aryan invasion. This date comes from Friedrich Max Müller, who had an enormous prestige at the time. That's why his estimate was not seriously questioned. His own pupil, Moritz Winternitz, objected that it was much too late. And at the end, Max Müller himself conceded that in fact it was not really based on any evidence, that it was a wild guess, and that we didn't really know when the Vedas started. So the question remains open. Fortunately, we have one objective measuring rod for Vedic chronology that is provided by astronomy, namely the phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes. The equinox axis moves past the constellations at the rate of 1 degree per circa 71 years. So the full circle takes more than 25,000 years. In the core part of the Rig Veda, there are no such useful indications. At the end and in later texts like the other Vedas and the Brahmanas, we do find about a dozen of such pointers. And so the fact that the Pleiades are placed on the equinoctial axis points to about the 23rd century BC. So the end of the Rig Veda and then the start of the other Vedas and Brahmanas would be about 23rd century BC. Similarly, in the Kaushitaki Brahmana, a similar period is indicated by the position of the star Regulus on the summer solstice. Then there is an ancillary work of the Vedas, the Vedanga Jyotisha, that is usually in the textbooks dated to shortly before the Christian age, actually dates itself twice to about 1350 BC. This is because it has asterisms or smaller groupings of stars on the winter solstice and the spring equinox points. And so they can be dated firmly thanks to the precession to the 14th century BC. The same thing with the same astronomical pointers counts for the Parashara Tantra. So here we deal with post-Vedic texts and very post-Rig Vedic texts. And so they say that the Vedic corpus was already complete by the time that the Aryan invasion theory only has the Aryans arrive in India and only start with the Vedas. Now, some people try to get rid of this evidence by saying, yeah, but you see, the writers may have dealt with not stellar positions that they saw, but reminiscences of positions centuries earlier. In the case of the two latest books, they are manuals of observational astronomy. So this already is ruled out, even for the earlier ones. If there are reminiscences spanning centuries between the actual Vedic age indicated and the age indicated by Max Müller, then that would mean that they had such an astronomical acumen that they kept tables, you see, spanning centuries, that itself would be a testimony in favor of the genuineness of their observations. Now, scholars have so far preferred to ignore this pertinent evidence but not all of them. But they have done so in a funny, disingenuous way. The Vedic Index by Keith and MacDonald admits that the Kaushitaki Brahmana points to a position of Magha that was true in about 2300 BC, and yet they insist that the Kaushitaki Brahmana dates only from 800 BC, fully 1500 years between the testimony that the text itself gives and the estimate that they prefer. Likewise, David Pingree, supposed authority, insists that the Vedanga Jyotisha was not in the 14th century, but only in the 5th or even later. He pleads that there is an evolution of language at a certain rate that necessitates the denial of astronomical information, because the language of the Vedanga Jyotisha would, according to his view, be only from the 5th or even later century. Now, that is ignoring the evidence. In this case, ignoring the evidence in the name of other evidence. Now, if two evidences are in conflict, then the scholarly attitude is to keep looking to accept the contradiction and to keep looking for how can we remedy this. But the right approach is never to simply ignore one part of the evidence. You know, you should harmonize the different type of evidences. Until then, you have to admit that you don't really know. So of all the astronomical data, not one supports the conventional chronology started by Max Müller. So it is not acceptable, yeah, well, I repeat, it's not acceptable to suppress one type of evidence. And yet you see here that is what has been done, what has been rather systematically done by all those who insist on the Aryan invasion chronology launched by Max Müller. So what the data support far better is the chronology given by Umapada Sen or by Shrikanta Lageri, which is that the end of the Vedas is in about 2000 BC, and the start is more than 3000 BC. One consequence of this, and I wind up with this observation, is that the recent hullabaloo about the Aryan invasion theory being proven by the genetic evidence of David Reich is a bit hasty and uncareful. You see, what he has shown, probably the argument goes on between geneticists, but I don't want to meddle, I'll accept it, is that people came in from the Northwest into India in about 1700 BC. Now, some in India have jubilated, oh, this proves the Aryan invasion. Well, maybe it proves an influx of people, and there have been many in Indian history by the Kushanas, the Greeks, the Turks, the Huns, and so on, and none of them changed India's linguistic landscape. Whereas here the Aryans are supposed to have kept their own language and even imposed it on the natives, namely Indo-Aryan, especially Sanskrit. Now, we don't mind, you see, if there was indeed an influx. Why not? You know, I have no reason to battle against it. Why? Because if people came in, well, just like the Scythians, the Huns, and so on, those people could be anyone, but not the bringers of Sanskrit, not the Vedic rishis. Why? Because they demonstrably were in India already more than 1,000 years. They had been composing the Vedas in India, and here and there giving some astronomical indications that showed, you see, that they were in India already far beyond 2000 BC. Thank you.